Welcome back to the Papers Podcast. We're so glad to have you here. We have another treat for you for our Health Professions Education Journal Club. This is paper 2 of our live recording at the Association for Medical Education in Europe 2023. We were in Glasgow. We were having fun. It was so great to see so many of you there. And we really felt the love all of you have for the podcast. Listen to the debates we have, listen to the insults we have for each other, but it's all in good fun. And we'd love to hear from you what you think of this episode. Enjoy.
All right, so let's start with our second episode. So welcome back to the Papers Podcast. And much like the 90s, brought to you in front of a live studio audience.
Yeah.
If you have no idea what television is, you have no idea what that reference was, but that's okay. The Papers Podcast is produced and in partnership with the Karolinska Institutet. And so we're so pleased to be a part of that. You can reach us at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com. You can find all the show notes and please disseminate these. These are free open access resources to you at Papers Podcast, or the email address is thepaperspodcast@gmail. The site is paperspodcast.com, and you can find us on any player. And the only ask we have of you is to give us a like or give us a 5-star rating, depending on what platform you use. And if you like the pod, can you recommend it to a colleague? Because this conversation gets better the more that we have a community that engages with us, recommending papers to us. Now, you weren't here for the infomercial. You really want to hear about paper number 2. Linda, what do you have for us today?
Thanks very much, John. So my paper today, I am calling What Are We Worth? With the emphasis on the we. The reference is of the paper is Identifying Value Factors in Institutional Leaders' Perspectives on Investing in Health Professions Educators. The first author is Anne Poncelet, and then there's a whole series of other authors. They are from UC San Francisco.
Actually, I think UCSF is also the home of the last paper. This is the UCSF show, everybody. You're right. I have no idea why we went that way, but it just worked out.
We're quite enjoying our trip to San Francisco now.
Chinese food? Yeah, okay, fine. We often say, why did we choose this paper? Well, I chose this paper for several reasons. Number one, it's from a clinical journal. It's from JAMA Network Open from February this year. And usually JAMA does clinical articles. It does occasionally do med ed stuff. And so I like it when medical education gets into a clinical journal. Also, it's open access. I'm all for supporting that. Second, unlike most of what we present, this paper discusses teachers, and in particular, health professions educators from the perspective of the value of these people to the systems leaders and the systems. And third, we talked earlier about how we like to learn something new. Well, this discusses a framework which was new to me. I'm sure that John knows all about it, but called VMM, or Value Measurement Methodology, which touches on leadership, economics, academic, strategic, and societal value domains of education. So let me first ask, just if you could put up your hands, if you consider yourself a health professions educator.
Yeah. If not, you're at the wrong conference.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's like an engineering one down.
So there's maybe one or two who didn't put up their hands, and I think they just didn't hear me. So this is a paper about you and your value to the system. Now, my chair of medicine, when I was vice chair education, used to remind me regularly that there is a reciprocity between education and healthcare, and that if you have excellent healthcare, you're more likely to have excellent education, and vice versa. And yet, health professions educators are often undervalued in our academic milieu. You know, they want to know how many publications you've had in high impact journals. And we know our high impact journals are nothing in terms of impact compared to some clinical journals. They want to know how many grant dollars or pounds or euros you've brought in. And med ed grants tend to be pretty small. So we don't look like we're doing very well. And yet they're making decisions on supporting us, particularly on funding us. And that can be anything from supporting our training to stipends when we're working, to endowed chairs, to supporting grants for education. And the leaders are often people who are either administrators or they're biomedical researchers. So funding for education can be threatened. From the business perspective, if I was a business person, which, by the way, I will never be, I would say there's
We saw how you handled the check at dinner. I think I paid it all.
That was well done, though, right? Yeah. That was intentional. Yeah.
So there's no return on investment if you look at it directly. If I invest whatever currency you want to use in training educators and supporting their growth and work, what amount am I getting back from that? So let's ask, what else do we, as health professions educators, bring to the system? Perhaps we need a different approach, particularly if we are going to talk to our leaders and say, we'd like this to be supported.
Linda, can we jump in?
Just what I was going to ask. So does this click with you? And Jason, I will say Jason says something, a quote of Jason's is, my clinical work supports my education habits. So maybe that has a little something to do. So let's go, Jason, Lara, John.
Okay, I want to attribute the following quote, which I really like. I'm working with a new team now, and the vice dean that I work with is a woman named Melissa Forgy. She's brilliant. She's full of energy. She has a wonderful quote when she's talking to decision makers who are really obsessed with research dollars or clinical imperatives. She says, medical education is for the patients of tomorrow. And that makes them important. And I just love that phrase. It's so powerful. It's a good showstopper. And the phrase I like to use when I'm in those rooms with CEOs is that, or deans, like this is another one, is just remind them that it's called a medical school, not a research institute. And so we bring that mission.
Lara.
One of the things that I find really troublesome in our discourses in different spaces, but it cuts across research disciplines, is that somehow money has become the marker of success. That we have turned education, which is supposed to be about learning, building new knowledge, pushing ideas, helping the next generation to stand on our shoulders. And we've turned that into how many dollars did you bring in today? Or what is the return on the investment of the, for instance, hour you spent mentoring someone so they could understand a concept in a deep and meaningful way. There's no dollar value you can put on that because it's priceless. I'm watching my language because it is priceless. It is a priceless gift that we give. And so when we start talking about, is this financially responsible? I get really nervous because the question is, what do you value? And if you value dollars, you're in the wrong business.
But to be fair to those guys, they're under pressure. They're under pressure. Right?
Oh, I understand they're under pressure, but we have to start pushing back. Well, anyway.
You off the soapbox?
For now, I fell, but it's fine.
I started to get nervous. Everyone had a quote, so I'm trying to remember a quote. And so I thought of a quote, and here's where I get sweaty. I'm not sure who to attribute it to. So don't look at I'm desperately trying to not look at my phone and look up the quote, but it's not everything that can be counted counts. And Is it Einstein? Please tell me it is. I don't know.
Keep
you can
going,
look at the
I'll
quote.
find out.
Okay, all right. I agree with the impassioned plea, but I sit in the decanal structure, and we have a 15% deficit we're going to have to hit this year. And so I'm looking at my budget that's going to get trimmed. And what I love about this paper, it gives me a different way to take into those budgetary meetings where you can start with impassioned things and then people get right down to the bottom line. And this VMM, which I'm not familiar with, but which I'm about to use because we are in this deficit and I'm facing a deficit for my own budget, which is going to get trimmed, is to offer categories, and we can talk a bit about Bowman and Deal later, but it offers similar categories, but it gives a way to say, let's assign value to it from an institutional lens. And when we see where the value is, then we have a matrix or a rubric that lets us then make those dollar decisions on the other side. And so this makes not only an argument from principles, but it gives us an operational feasibility to actually make the decisions when it counts. So that's why I'm excited by this paper.
Good, thank you. Lara, did you find who said it?
Yeah, but it's an AI answer, so I'm not sure.
All right.
But it says that it's William Bruce Cameron instead of Albert Einstein, and it's Cameron's 1963 text, Informal Sociology. It might be right. A Causal Introduction to Sociological Thinking.
So many big words all the time.
Yeah, right. Okay, moving on, and thank you, John, because that actually led to the methods section. And I'll give you a bit of a heads up, Lara. I am going to ask you at the end of the methods section to discuss a specific question I have about reflexivity. Mm-hmm. And John, I have a specific question to you about validation when it comes to interviews. Okay. So very briefly, to add on to what John said about VMM, which comes from the US government, I think, it presents 5 domains of values. The individual benefits, the financial benefits, costs, revenues, operational benefits, like does it improve the system? An example of that might be, does it improve length of stay? Which then has a secondary financial benefit. Societal benefits to a group or to society, and strategic or political benefits such as advancing an institution's mission or strategic goals or priorities or mandates. So an example of that might be patient safety. It's kind of a bit reminiscent of Bowman and Deal for those who don't know that 4 frames of leadership. And this framework has rarely been applied in academic medicine, let alone in academic support for educators. So to the study, it's a qualitative study, uses semi-structured interviews to get the perspectives of leaders at multiple levels. Could be deans, department chairs, health system leaders who had a wide range of experience and from a wide range of disciplines. From UCSF, which is a big academic health professions institution, and its affiliated health systems. The interview guide reflected and defined these 5 VMM factors, and it was adapted for education, used local exemplars. Like, just in case you don't understand what we mean with all these big words, here's how we do it here. The guide was piloted, but it wasn't validated. And a thematic analysis was used with constructivist orientation. I'm not going to go more into that because I think we have other things to talk about. There was a nice reflexivity statement. Mm-hmm. And given there were multiple authors with varied backgrounds, it described these varied backgrounds. And then they said, the authors engaged in regular reflective discussion, which enabled us to consider or challenge each other's assumptions when interpreting findings. So the 2 questions. John, I always thought that questionnaires should be validated, but in this case, it's not a questionnaire, it's sort of an interview guide. So do interview guides have to be validated in some way, like a questionnaire?
Apologies to Tony Artino, who listens to the podcast, who will have lots of opinion about interview guides and how you do surveys. I think we use the word validation in a colloquial way, rather than a technical way when we're talking about the validity argument for some kind of instrument that's measuring something. And so pre the psychometric era, we talked about construct validity or predictive validity as some kind of feature of measurement where we could show correlation to another measure. We've moved past that to say, how do we know that how you measure, aggregate, extrapolate, and how it affects the system using different frameworks? Messick or Kane would be the classic 2 frameworks around validity arguments. How do we know that how you put all your data together and analyzed it actually is reflecting what the data needs to say? But I think what we're truly saying here when we're trying to use this instrument is, can we test it to make sure that language is interpreted in a way that we intend it to be, so that we're asking a question and then subsequently interpreting that data in a way that's coherent throughout. And so this is the classic problem with health professions education research. We use a word and we all interpret it slightly different. And so here I think we're talking about validity in a way that is being too ubiquitous in a colloquial way rather than being very precise kind of term.
So I would say that, in fact, this probably was a reasonably valid interview guide, because the words that might have been misinterpreted were explained using a local context.
Yep.
So,
and I think, because I've just the one last thing is, anytime you hear the word, we used a valid instrument in any kind of research, you got to say, beat it, because you don't get this gold stamp of approval and then get to take your instrument and just push it all around into every other context and use it outside of context. The argument for that this instrument is doing what we think it is
she's been holding her breath.
She got to use constructivist. She got to use everything in the last episode. God help me, we're getting to psychometrics. I'm so excited.
No, it's not psychometrics though, right? Because this is a constructivist study. And I think one of the things we have to remember, okay, so major thumbs up to the authors. I got one too. Like, it's not that big a deal. But this is JAMA. I've been trying to break into JAMA for years. Like, I literally submit to these journals every single year because I'm wearing them down. Right? At some point, I'll get a pity publish, and I'm okay with that. Right? But this, you can't, like, the extent to which these journals are coming from a post-positivist orientation. So they're thinking validity, generalizability, all of that replicability stuff, which is important stuff, don't get me wrong, under one way of thinking. What this validity comment is in this paper is amazing stick handling. This is Wayne Gretzky level. I'm going to get through these defenders and score a goal. Because what they did is pilot the interview to make sure that the participants understood. They did some piloting. They said, do you understand? You getting the data you want? Good. Off we go. So it's piloting is what they did. Now I can understand you call it validity in this journal because it's about using language to get in. And sometimes the most important thing you do is get in so you can start breaking down the barriers.
So basically what you say is find all the buzzwords and add them every other paragraph.
No, that's what you do, honey. That's a different way of writing a paper.
All right. Okay. I'm going to cut off this discussion.
You do that, dear.
Because I want you to answer another question, Lara.
Okay.
And it's about reflexivity. And it's a challenge that I've had recently, and I wondered whether these authors had it. Multi-authored study.
Yeah.
Everyone's from all over the map.
Yeah.
And if everyone was to write their own reflexivity statement, it would be 2 pages of a 3-page paper.
True fact.
So what these authors do is say 4 people are from this perspective and 5 from this and 1 from that, and we discuss things.
Right.
That's very short.
Yeah.
Is that enough?
And
or
again,
do we
with
need
the
something
numbers.
in between?
It's a qualitative paper and it's filled with numbers.
It's not like you can't have numbers in a qualitative paper, right?
I'm just saying, it feels shoehorned.
Okay.
4 of us are
Lara.
this.
All right. So
Lara.
Varpio is saying something. So first of all, if you're looking for how to write a reflexivity section, Amy Guide number 149, A Practical Guide to Reflexivity and Qualitative Research. I happen to be an author on it, so I try not to promote my own self. But the first author is Olmos Vega, and it walks you through how to write reflexivity sections. The important thing about a reflexivity section is don't think of it as a hello, my name is tag. It's not, I am Lara and I'm a professor and I do this. The idea is about reflecting and thinking about how your subjectivity, who you are, has shaped and influenced the way you're interpreting and thinking about the data. And the part of the reason you do that is so somebody else can say, oh, you guys came at it from that angle, that ain't my angle. And that's okay. It just means that our findings don't speak to you in your context. And that's why we write it. So again, I think part of the reason it's so short and why there's some numbers, and it's okay to have numbers, but part of the reason it's so short is because they needed to get in.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move us on as I'm getting an evil eye from someone in the audience.
We've got 18 minutes.
15?
18.
Okay. Let's look at some of the results. So the authors interviewed 29 leaders of varied levels and backgrounds. They had university leaders, campus leaders, health systems leaders, which I assume means hospital leaders, health professions, schools leaders, et cetera, department chairs. And the leaders expanded on those 5 VMM domains and thought that the most important domains were the individual factors, such as the impact on faculty career or stature, or personal and professional development, and the education programs, such as recruiting faculty, retaining faculty, what the curricula looked like. But the leaders also had perspectives on financial factors that were more than just a return on investment, tangible support, the ability to attract additional resources, the importance of these investments as monetary input rather than monetary output. And then some social and societal factors such as scholarship, dissemination benefits, and benefits to learners and patients. And finally, strategic and political factors, the impact on culture, the symbolism, that's beginning to sound like Bowman and Deal again, innovation, and organizational stature and success. I'm going to stop here for brief comments, and we'll go John, Jason, Lara.
I really liked how they were able to articulate the value in each of these. The one that stood out for me was, again, around finances, perhaps speaking to my own positionality right now. And there's this great quote in the table, which is, money is an input, not an output.
Yeah.
So that's a quote I'm going to probably try to use and try to co-opt a bit. I found it interesting that they talked about how they were able to determine that the educational reputation of the institution really is important in that reputational strategic element, and to assign value to it. And so that if there's a denigration of the educational reputation, it has institutional wide support. And I think that's how we start to make arguments about the value we have as clinician educators. And the final little bit would be a limitation that the authors propose themselves, which is their data is collected before a lot of the social justice movements happened in North America, specifically Black Lives Matter and Me Too. And so we always have to understand that as we assign value to these domains, it's always contextual and it's changing. And so let's not say, hey, we have some kind of report from 15 years ago and it tells us here's how we are going to determine the priorities and where we put value in our institution, but it's a dynamic kind of piece.
2 points. One, I think it's going to happen one day that an institution's going to figure out that if they have an amazing reputation as a school that students are excited about, they can kiss off any World News Report, Maclean's ranking, because it won't matter. Students are smart, they'll vote with their feet. And if you get the reputation as the school that has the best educational experience and the students are learning and having fun and it's rich, it's a money-making deal. Done. The mic drop moment for me in this paper, quote, a pure economic model is too narrow a tool to measure valued outcomes from the academic education mission. End quote. Boom. Done. Next.
Lara's dropping mics. I agree. I think we're all hitting on that this paper is a paper that everybody in this room can use. All of us are in institutions that are under intense financial stress. And all of us are in institutions where the leaders are under pressure to talk about ROI. And sometimes it becomes a really vacuous conversation, right? Because we're trying to explain education and we're in different worlds when we're talking. I think it's a really powerful paper. I think there's lots of quotes in here and there's methodology that we can all apply. And I relate to it. I can hear in these conversations, I can hear conversations that I've been a part of, where I've been talking to decision makers and I'm talking to them about things like recruitment and retention. I'm talking about scholarship. And what's really hard though is trying to explain the idea that the educational mission is critical to the culture and success of the institution. That one's really hard. This paper might be a translator.
Great,
just
thank you.
You kind of look like Darth Vader.
Now you're printing
All right,
my
sorry, go on.
colors.
Okay. It's interesting. I think we all picked on that quote, a pure economic model is too narrow a tool to measure valued outcomes of the academic education mission. It's interesting in that paragraph that followed, they used terms like economic imperialism, economic power over education, hegemony. I don't know whether I pronounced that right.
Hegemony, yeah.
And they propose a move to a more holistic model. The authors do say that leaders, perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, depending on your leader, find value in funding educator investment programs in multiple domains. And for us, I think those different value factors are going to inform advocacy. For those of us in the room that have to go talk to your dean or department chair or want to bring on a new person or have someone fund a new grant or something like that, use this. The quotes in here are excellent. It's also something that we might think of when we're evaluating programs. Okay, so we have to look for those metrics that we can then use. Okay, let's go on to the vote.
Yay.
Can I do a different vote to start with? And for the audio track, Jason's wearing all black. Can we vote? Is he more John Wick?
Thank you.
Or Darth Vader?
Hey.
Who's picking on my asthma today? I don't understand.
All right. Let's do the real vote.
Okay.
And of course, it's this highly validated scale, Lara.
We got to ask the audience their input before we vote.
We are.
Okay. I want to hear comments though.
See, this is how they know we're not professionals.
Jimmy.
Okay, comment in the back and speak up so the mic picks it up.
So as a medical education research scientist that is now a department chair, that's really resonated. But my concern is that sampling from one setting, that being a highly academic setting in a particular geographic and political context, makes me very curious what kind of variation might exist out there with people who might be in community settings, less academic settings, more rural settings, because I think that there's a lot of variation, and I would be curious on how that affects the translation of value.
Great.
Love it.
next
How about
slide.
another country? Like,
Yeah.
it'd be a different conversation.
I agree, although I would suggest that perhaps this setting is not the most positive towards education support in some cases.
Just a brief comment. As an early career researcher and a young educator, sometimes I have to advocate a lot for these values. And sometimes the very reductionist comment I get is, well, then you don't need a salary, do you? Because you believe in education.
Well, we could say the same thing about patient care, I suppose.
Yeah, you believe in it, so do it for free. Yeah.
Okay. Other comments? Wave your hand if you...
Mike.
Go ahead.
So I just want to echo the comments in the back, and especially in the U.S. where we have private equity firms buying academic health centers. I wonder what this paper tells us as educators. It didn't say that economic models were useless tools. It said they were insufficient tools. What is the charge to us?
Yeah, I think the charge to us is to look at those other areas and find out what the value is. But they address it somewhat in here. Perhaps try and link it with economic value down the line.
No.
No?
Well, I wouldn't want to do that. But it doesn't mean you couldn't do it. I think you absolutely can, but I think it's a very dangerous thing. Every time we compare ourselves to something that is a metric that is increasingly difficult to achieve unless you have a very specific kind of data set of a very specific scope. It's like when we say that we have direct impact on patient care. Right? We, along with a lot of other things, have direct impact on patient care, but how much data would it take to say that, this intervention over here affected patients? I think it's the same thing with education. We increase value financially in these. I get nervous about that. I would love to think that our value is closer to home. Our value is what we do for learners. It's the quality of skill sets that we ensure. It's the responsibility of those individual clinicians as they go out, that they're better clinicians, better prepared. Like that's where we got to put our money.
Thank you. And I absolutely agree with you.
Cool.
That was very impassioned.
John does too.
Squirrel.
Right. Now we're going to do the vote. Remember, methods 1 to 5. Put up your hand for the methods.
1 to 5
1
methods.
to 5 fingers.
4.
I see
some
fours.
fours.
Lots of fours.
Lots of fours.
Some
Lots of fours.
5s. Mainly 4s. Agree, disagree, panel?
I think it's 4.
Yeah.
It works for me. But it's a 5 because it got in.
Okay.
Someday.
Right, eventually.
All right. Education impact. Again, 1 to 5. Let's get those hands up. I can't
Everybody's got a
see.
play.
Got a 2, got some 4s. Ooh,
Wow.
we're all over the board.
Very
This is
interesting. Hey, that's all over the
Yeah.
place.
We're using the whole scale. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
It's not a real scale. It's just
not a real
fiction.
scale.
We made it
Okay.
up. Yeah.
On that note, I would like to thank you all for
Yes.
being here. It is so much fun.
Yay! Super podcast people.
John is asking me to say something, but
Can
I
you
can't
read that?
read his writing.
You say it.
So you can say it.
So before we sign off, just a reminder, we'd love for you to subscribe. Follow us on Spotify, Apple, or whatever your pod listener is. We'd love you to give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up, depending on how you rank it. And if you could recommend it to a colleague, because we want to broaden the conversation the best we can. So thank you.
And write to us. Tell us, the papers you want us to review, the bright young researcher you want us to give a shout out to.
Yes.
Why you love the health professions education literature. Why John's wrong. All of those important things.
That's a separate email. It's got
It's too long
special
for an
category.
email.
yeah, it's got a bigger database.
There are free mugs for everybody. Your swag
Thank
for
you for
attending today.
coming.
Thank you to the people who stood through the whole episode.
Yes, thank you in the
You're good
back.
people.
And thank you to Karolinska Institutet.
There you
Yes,
go.
tack så mycket. Tack, tack.
Get a purple thing.